train sounding loud, light on the peace train.
He conquered the wild world of pop with heartfelt songs that spoke eloquently to his times.
Don't you feel a change coming from another side of time?
Essentially, I lived and breathed music. That was my life.
Matthew and Tom, the work's never done. There's always something new.
He burst onto the scene in the swinging 60s, a fresh-faced teen sensation called Cat.
Got out of the car with all these girls screaming. They've actually almost stripped him. It was unbelievable.
I was on the road, sleeping between lorry lights.
But the young star burned out in a flash.
Trouble, oh, trouble set me free.
The doctor said to him that, you only had a couple of weeks of life left in you. You would have been dead.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world.
Cat climbed back, this time to even greater heights. In the 70s, he sent 7 albums into the top 10.
This is a guy that could sell out Madison Square Garden 2 nights in a row without a record out.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
But after selling 40 million records, he turned his back on the business, and Cat Stevens was no more.
There was no more left in me.
I want to get off, is what he was saying. And I want to be free.
I think I see the light coming through me.
His devoted fans were mystified, unable or unwilling to understand why.
I'm still being viewed as someone who has said and done things which I've never said and never done.
Don't hand me back to me, bitter blue, my bitter blue.
Now, for the first time, he sets the record straight about his remarkable journey. The tale of a cat with 3 lives. Cat Stevens, the story behind the music.
I'm trying now to come out to give people a chance to have a bit more intimate understanding of who I am and what I believe.
That gave my last chance to you. Don't hand it back to me, bitter blue. Listen to the wind of my soul. Where I'll end up, well, I think only God really knows.
The force that propels his soul has taken him on an extraordinary journey. More than once, he ascended the heights of stardom. More than once, he faced death. And more than once, he was saved.
I swam upon the devil's lake, but never, 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 I'll never make the same mistake.
In a relentless quest for his true identity, he changed his sound, his persona, and even his name.
Now I'm on my way, I know I am.
The world knew him as Cat Stevens, the poetic troubadour whose searching songs speak to generations.
I thank the moon, I had the strength to stop.
But while the writer's introspective lyrics may have pointed to his journey's end, when he turned his back on stardom, it shocked everyone.
I just decided to take a jump. And I said, until I know better, until I know how music can fit into this whole thing, or how I can express myself in a new way, perhaps I better take a break.
Come the morning, I'll be far from here, slowly rising in another sphere. Oh, world, goodbye.
The path he chose led him to a faith few in the West understand.
I'll be home in the sky in the morning. Bye, bye. Bye, bye.
In 1975, just before he was to undertake another major tour, an anxious Cat Stevens visited Jerry Moss at his home in Malibu.
I think we were hoping it was going to be a nicer day, and somehow it didn't turn out that way. It was pretty much like this kind of day.
With his hosts inside preparing for lunch, Cat decided to go swimming. But just as he swam beyond the surf, he was caught in a current and pulled out to sea.
suddenly I realized that I was fighting the ocean, and the tide was going that way, and I wasn't getting any closer. The fear of death struck me, and I suddenly held myself and I said, "Oh God, if you save me, I'll work for you." And at that moment, a wave pushed me forward, and suddenly I was swimming back with all the energy that I needed, and I was back on land. And I thank God.
On that fateful day, Cat Stevens made a solemn promise that he would repay God for sparing his life, but he had no idea how he'd fulfill it.
I was just grateful to still be here, because I was a lover of life, you know, and I still hadn't worked it out, and now I was given a chance, second chance.
Miles from nowhere, yes, I'll take my time. Oh yeah, to reach there.
For nearly a year he waited for a sign. It came in the form of a gift from his brother David.
He just traveled to Jerusalem, and I suppose it was a mini sort of spiritual journey for him. But it's amazing that he discovered another religion.
I kind of almost tripped into it by going to the Dome on the Rock, which is the mosque there. I gave my brother the Quran because I felt there was something very special in the religion of Islam. He sat there and he read this thing, and he doesn't do anything lightheartedly.
And what he discovered in the Quran is a faith that he says is more familiar than foreign. Cat was learning that, like Christians and Jews, Muslims worship the one God of Abraham.
When I first started reading the Quran, it wasn't a sudden, bursting light. It wasn't like that. But it was, in a way, an immediate revelation that the first name that I read in the Quran was God's name. I never knew that Muslims believed in God. One of the things that really surprised me, which made me feel very at home, was finding the names of all the prophets that I've read in the Bible.
For the next year, Cat Stevens privately studied the Quran. Unlike his earlier explorations, this spiritual journey was one he seemed intent on completing.
Come on now, it's freedom calling. Come on over and find yourself.
To me, it was just a new awakening. And things which I've been writing about, come on now, it's freedom calling. Come on over and find yourself. I was now saying to myself, well, perhaps I'm being confronted with something that I didn't expect to find in my lifetime. Possibly the truth.
Cat Stevens was a man in the midst of profound change when he set out on the tour he called Magic Hat in November 1975.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax and take it easy. You're still young, that's your fault. There's so much you have to know. Find a girl.
6 months later, he played his final show of the tour in Greece. Due to a scheduling mix-up, Cat performed to a half-empty auditorium. The Magic Hat tour came to an abrupt end.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
I gave up, plugged out my guitar and just walked off stage.
Okay.
Shortly after finishing Father and Son, he basically stopped off.
And that cost me a lot of money as well. But it satisfied my ego.
And that was effectively the last concert we ever did.
Inspired by the Quran, Cat Stevens was gradually moving toward the Islamic faith. In early 1977, his spiritual journey continued when he traveled to Jerusalem.
There I was, in the middle of, this holy city, walking into this mosque. And I think some Muslims came up to me because, they'd had some problem before, people walking in and trying to cause damage to the mosque. They came up to me and they said, who are you? I think that was the first time that I said, I'm a Muslim.
Translated from Arabic, a Muslim is one who surrenders to God. Stevens was about to do just that, fulfilling the promise he'd made after surviving a brush with death in the waters off Malibu. But for a time, Cat Stevens would drift between the worlds of faith and fame.
I was on the road, sleeping between lorry lights, all alone, stone drunk and cold.
In April '77, he released Is It So? The album harkened back to his earlier work, but songs like I Never Wanted to Be a Star clearly expressed his growing weariness with the trappings of stardom.
I think I see the light, not another beat in the star machine. Oh no, this time I won't go.
Cat's focus was clearly shifting. The 29-year-old immersed himself in the study of the Quran. And then Stevens came across a beautiful story that in many ways mirrored his own life.
I think that revelation came when I read the Quran, and it was the chapter of Joseph, the story of Joseph, the son of Jacob. It was his story that really opened my heart, and I started to weep. And I said, this is not the word of a man. This is God's word.
Allahu Akbar, Allah. When I accepted the Quran was indeed a book from God, it was natural for me to accept the prophet who received this book as being the last prophet. Allahu Akbar.
Then, in December 1977, he walked into London's Central Mosque and embraced Islam. Now a true Muslim, Cat Stevens decided to change his name one last time.
I suppose the name that I'd always loved was Joseph. In fact, that was the first name of the school that I went to, St. Joseph's. And of course, because of the chapter of the Quran, which really opened my heart, I said, that's the name. Later, my Arabic teacher who was teaching me how to pronounce Arabic, I told him that was my choice. He said, can't you use the Arabic pronunciation? I said, yeah, why not? So, Yusuf Islam.
I thought it was a hobby right up until the time he embraced Islam. I made no distinction between numerology, Zen Buddhism, salt-free diets. It happened very quickly. How I found out, I can't remember it, by osmosis. Steve is now Yusuf.
But Yusuf still had obligations as Cat Stevens. So in 1978, he made one last album. The appropriately titled Back to Earth was an eloquent farewell.
I'm not seeking any more pain, 'cause I've had enough of that.
I was now able to make life my art. I now have been singing about, doing so many great things and changing the world. Well, the Quran said, to me, if you don't change what's within you, you can't change anything. And so that's where you have to start.
There was no more left in me.
Back to earth was his coming down, his getting off. I want to get off, is what he was saying. I want to get off, and I want to be free.
Then Yusuf realized he may have to sacrifice the career to which he dedicated so much of his life.
Being on stage, being highlighted, and being, if you like, the center of attention was in itself slightly idolizing. And that, of course, was opposed to what Islam was teaching. Gluttony, conceit, competition, envy, sex, drugs, rock and roll. So therefore, it was obvious that I had to readjust myself to my new life.
So in May 1978, Yusuf Islam announced the Cat Stevens era was over. It was an unprecedented move. No other star of his stature had walked away so abruptly.
from a business point of view, he was really not interested in recording anymore. And since he was the biggest selling artist we had at the time, that was obviously disappointing.
Billy Joel once said that if the devil was going to go into business, he would go into the music business. The music business is about egos. It's about inflating egos. Islam is very much opposite that kind of ethic. It's about diminishing the power of the ego.
Away from the limelight, Yusuf Islam began privately practicing his faith. The director of London's Central Mosque remembers that the congregation welcomed Yusuf, but were uncertain what to make of the former superstar.
The British community in general regarded this also with both fascination, admiration, and, shall I say, mystification as well. Because what on earth, what is there in Islam to make a man abandon fame and fortune so easily?
While his family came to understand and support his decision, Yusuf Islam was now building a new life and leaving his past behind.
He seemed to fall in love with the religion, and when it came to marriage, he was very wise in as much as he went along the route of the arranged marriage. And I think he had a couple of choices.
And I remember bringing them home to see Mum, and have like dinner. And then after that, I asked my mother, well, which girl do you think I should marry, and she said, and she told me which one, and she was right.
Yusuf was married on September 7th, 1979, and was looking forward to becoming a father. Yusuf loved children. Over the years, he had made several trips to Africa and Bangladesh as the Goodwill Ambassador for UNICEF. So when he was asked to play at a children's benefit concert, he readily agreed. The thousands who came to London's Wembley Stadium on November 22nd, 1979, witnessed the final performance of Cat Stevens. Many fans and friends grappled with why someone with such a God-given talent would turn his back to it.
It's not time to make a change. Just relax, take it easy.
It was strange, sad, and it was the basis of a great deal of my career, so it was a vast change for me.
I'd been very, very fortunate in attaching myself to a major talent, so for a while there was a sense of loss.
And I know that I have to go away. I know I have to go.
Yusuf Islam donated much of his fortune to humanitarian causes. He gave up alcohol, and erasing any hope of a return to the stage, he auctioned off all his musical instruments, giving the proceeds to charity.
I was giving up a kind of a cultural crutch, right? And I didn't need that anymore to walk. I was now able to walk in the light.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أفغير دين الله يبغون وله أسلم من.
I said to him, well, I hope you will continue to sing. Oh, he said, no, I have given it up. Why not? Why have you? Why have you given it up for? And he said that, he was told that it was haram. It was not allowed in Islam. I said, well, that's a view which is not really the sound view.
There were times when I listened to a lot of people, even as Muslims, telling me which way to go. And I was a little bit confused because there were different messages. Because there was nothing in the Quran which told me that music is forbidden. It doesn't say music, thou shalt not play. I always took the safest path.
For Yusuf, the safe path meant abiding by a conservative Muslim view of music. If he was ever to perform again, he would use nothing more than his voice and percussion.
Eyes for Allah, nothing but Allah. Ba is the beginning of Bismillah.
In 1981, inspired by the birth of his first child, a little girl called Hasana, Yusuf Islam returned to writing. His first new work was a song called A is for Allah, a children's guide to Islam.
He is very, very concerned with the blossoming, if you like, of an Islamic Western culture. And the best place to begin with that is within education.
Well, that's right. What's your name? Yeah, you know who I am?
Yeah, I know. Yusuf Islam.
Yes.
In 1983, Yusuf used his own money to create the UK's first all-Muslim school called Islamia.
I wasn't clever, I wasn't an academic, but I knew I had a job to do, and that was to teach my child, not only the academic aspects and general subjects, but how to live.
His work on behalf of Muslim children pushed Yusuf Islam back onto the front page, and he reluctantly became an unofficial spokesman for his new faith, a role he would soon pay a high price for.
Oh, I'm on my way, I know I am, somewhere not so far from here.
By the mid-1980s, pop star Cat Stevens had vanished into the shadows. Now, Yusuf Islam emerged into the light. He worked tirelessly for Muslim causes around the world and was compelled to serve as a spokesman for the Islamic community. Yet the media viewed his every move with suspicion. Then in February 1989, he was drawn into a controversy which for a time would eclipse a decade of good deeds. When British author Salman Rushdie was about to publish his novel The Satanic Verses, it caused an outrage in Muslim communities around the world. They alleged that the author committed blasphemy by insulting God and his prophets.
I was contacted by someone saying there's a book coming out and will you join a petition to write to the publishers? And that's what we did, it was very simple.
The petition to stop the book's distribution failed. Then the already volatile situation was ignited. Iran's Islamic leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, issued a judgment or a fatwa calling for the death of Salman Rushdie.
I found myself somehow being pushed up to the front of the vanguard of this kind of struggle and being asked to comment.
Because our aim is an ideal society. I mean, if you take...
Within days of the controversy erupting, Yusuf Islam found himself in the hot seat, pressed to explain the Quran's position on blasphemy. Yusuf, a recent convert, said, like the Bible, the Quran states that blasphemy is a capital offense.
I'd done enough studying at that point to be able to actually sort of more or less quote, chapter and verse and the commentary of religious texts based on the Quran, of which there are different opinions. But I said, well, yeah, it says this. Next day, the headline read, "Cat says kill Rushdie." And I was horrified.
The newspapers had it wrong. He never endorsed the fatwa on Rushdie's life.
I was simply a new Muslim who had stated something which I thought was quite simple. And if you were to ask a Bible student, what the Ten Commandments were, you would expect him to read that and you wouldn't blame him for that.
Appalled by the media's distortion of his comments, Yusuf immediately released a statement to clarify his position. It read, "That is not to say I am encouraging people to break the law or take it into their own hands. Far from it." It went on to say, "Under Islamic law, Muslims are bound to keep within the limits of the law of the country in which they live, providing that it does not restrict the freedom to worship and serve God and fulfill their basic religious duties."
I think I was a little bit naive many times. Perhaps I should have thought a little bit more before answering. But then again, I was expecting that people had good intentions, but it's not like that.
In the end, few in the media paid attention to his attempts to set the record straight.
There are no words I can use, because the meaning still leaves for you to choose.
Yusuf Islam's reputation was seriously tarnished by the controversy. Some shops advised their customers to stop buying Cat Stevens records, and one American DJ even destroyed them.
Driving a steamroller over my records, and I thought, strange thing to do, The most unfortunate thing about this whole episode was, I suppose, the way in which it separated me from my fans and from those people who had appreciated my words and my life and my journey.
He had to pay the price. From suddenly being the star, he had to become the anti-star as a result. He had to be the sort of reviled one almost. It just had to happen.
When I realized what was happening, I felt there was a time to get proactive. It became obvious that we can't just let others talk about what we believe.
Now, convinced he had to do something to promote a greater understanding of his faith, Yusuf decided to record once more.
His life ever shines as a symbol of light and guidance for all time and for all people.
In 1995, he released The Life of the Last Prophet, a CD of song and spoken word. The record told the story of God's messenger, Muhammad.
Muhammadur Rasulullah.
I wanted someone who was coming from a Western background, who knew very little or nothing about this man, about this religion, to tell them in 1 hour what it's all about.
The experience was a turning point for Yusuf. Now he realized music still had a purpose. It could educate. It could serve his faith.
Oh, the white moon rose over us from the valley of Wada.
I think he was recognizing he'd been a bit too stiff, a bit too rigid in the past, and that you really had to take a much more fluid position. It's not all black and white. In many cases, music can have many, many positive effects. It can be very beautiful, it can be therapeutic, it can raise people's spirits.
And we owe it to show gratefulness where the call is to Allah.
If Yusuf had any question that music could again play an important role in his life, he would find his answer under the harshest of circumstances.
Fierce fighting has erupted in Bosnia. There are said to have been an enormous number of casualties in Sarajevo.
Sarajevo is confused and catastrophic.
In the early 90s, the world woke up, slowly and belatedly, to the brutal conflict that was being waged in the former Yugoslavia. The battle lines were drawn along ethnic and religious lines.
It's unimaginable to see how some human beings behave, with blind prejudice. Here it was, in the middle of Europe, the end of the 20th century, another genocide taking place.
Oh, they've killed all the little ones while their faces still smiled. There was nothing to help them on the day that they died. No longer to laugh, no longer to be a child.
Yusuf Islam began a humanitarian project to support the victims of the war by sending food and medical supplies. That aid was used by people like Dr. Irfan Ljubijankić. Dr. Ljubijankić, who also served as Bosnia's foreign minister, traveled to England on a diplomatic mission in 1995. While in London, he visited Yusuf to thank him for his efforts.
I was really honored that he, as a doctor, as a symbol in a way of the defiance and the strength of the Bosnian nation, how he as a doctor had worked selflessly in the basement of Sarajevo, helping put together broken limbs and shot off, arms and legs. And this man, to me, was a brave man.
Before he returned to Sarajevo, Dr. Ljubijankić gave Yusuf Islam a gift. A tape of a song he'd written about the enduring spirit of the Bosnian people. Just 3 months later, Yusuf received horrible news. Dr. Ljubijankić was killed when his helicopter was shot out of the sky.
And I remember walking into his office the day he'd heard this news, and he looked, palpably shocked.
That was the moment when I realized that the song he left me was something that I had to now do something with.
I have no candles that roar, but I have faith in God and love.
The song was called I Have No Cannons That Roar and became the title track of an album of contemporary and traditional Bosnian music produced and financed by Yusuf Islam.
And I surrender you to no one else, my mother, Bosnia, my love.
To the Western ear, they do sound a bit strange when you first hear them. But so I think Yusuf kind of picked up on that and realised that actually making a record like this was more just to raise awareness.
And Yusuf didn't stop with the record. On November 15th, 1997, he drew world attention to the plight of the Bosnian people by stepping onto a Sarajevo stage. That night, in front of 10,000 survivors, he celebrated the spirit of their culture by giving his first live performance in nearly 2 decades.
Facing an audience again after 17 years wasn't particularly easy, but at the same time, because I had this wonderful support of people whose spirits were so strong and so vital, it lifted me.
It's so quiet in the ruins, walking through the old town. Stones crumbling under my feet, I see smoke for miles around.
Now a fragile peace holds in the streets of Sarajevo, but the city and its people still bear the scars of war.
Assalamu alaikum. We have come to see how you are now and how we can continue to support you. So we're here not just to sing, but to actually help rebuild lives, helping families, victims, invalids. That to me brings harmony to life. And songs give a background. If you ask me who my God is, on whose name I call, if you ask me who my God is, He's the God of us all, Allah the Merciful.
In Bosnia, Yusuf has set up a foundation to aid orphans, the disabled, and the displaced. It is only one of more than a dozen charities he supports through fundraising and with the substantial royalties he continues to receive from the music he made as Cat Stevens.
Back in the old days, so nice to see you coming back in this town again. It's nice to see your friendly faces come peeking through. Haven't seen you in the afternoon now.
Paradoxically, the world he lives in today, the Islamic world, he's just as busy. They make just as many demands on him. He's never got any time to do anything. In fact, he works harder now than he ever did as a pop star. He's like a virtuoso musician without an instrument.
So nice to see you coming back in this town again.
Music, movies.
I've been happy lately, thinking about the good things to come, and I believe it could be something good has begun.
From Mozambique to Malaysia, from the Sudan to Turkey, Yusuf Islam travels extensively as a humanitarian ambassador and philanthropist.
These trains sounding louder, ride on the peace train.
Everywhere I go, there are people ready to shake my hand, wanting to meet me and talk to me and just listen to my experience.
Hoş geldiniz. Assalamu alaikum. Hoş geldiniz.
Assalamu alaikum. And so oftentimes I'm asked to just give talks and lectures in universities. I started reflecting my thoughts and those questions which were knocking at my conscience. I started writing those kind of lyrics in my songs. It's a wonderful experience. It's a wonderful road.
I know we've come a long way. We're changing day to day.
Back home in England, the father of 5 remains a vocal activist for education. Yusuf started his first school in 1983. Today he runs 4. And after 15 years of lobbying, he helped convince the British government to grant one of them funding. It was a significant victory in overcoming the prejudices his faith often faces.
All I try to do is to give a helping hand. Either give charity or educate, or stand up for human and spiritual rights.
How great the beauty of the earth and the creatures who dwell on her.
My religion teaches me to worship God and to care for the poor and the oppressed. And I think nobody's going to change my religion. So that's my work and that's my life.
Here too are signs. God is the light, God is the light.
Today, Yusuf's work includes a spiritual and cultural media enterprise. As a new generation is quickly discovering, the former pop star is still a creative and influential force.
I use the development and the production of my albums, my books, to, if you like, express my art. And I'm very happy with the way things are going. Mountain of Light is my label through which I kind of express my artistic tendency.
There's very few people of his sort of fame and wealth who've actually directed it to sort of something really positive. He's actually done a lot of real good things with it. I mean, he's not necessarily done everything right.
Cause I will learn to understand if I have a helping hand. I wouldn't make another demand all my life. Whoa.
After much searching, the man the world loved as Cat Stevens has found his answer. And faith has brought him a fulfillment that fame and fortune could not.
Is the answer lies within. So why not take a look now? Kick out the devil's in. Pick up a good book now. Ooh.
His is an amazing journey with a moral foretold in the enduring words he wrote and the songs he sang all those years ago.
I wouldn't see myself in any way slipping back into those old boots, that I used to wear, whatever color. But definitely communication is my business now. And I think that music is one of the forms of communication. It's an international language. So whatever will speak to people, whatever people will be ready to listen to, I'll be there, I hope.
Get your bags together.